Today is Thursday, October 30th, 2003. This is the beginning of an interview with Dr. Tom West. Dr. West is a veteran of World War II, where he served in the United States Navy, and he also had continuing service in the United States Public Health Service. This interview is being conducted at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Frederick Wallace, and I am the interviewer. Dr. West, as I have explained before, this is your story, and we want you to tell it in your own words. So, will you begin, please?
All right. I was born the fourth and last child of a physician in Live Oak, Florida. Attended the public schools there, and at age 14, I was invited to take part in the Florida National Guard, Company E, 124th Infantry. And this occurred in 1937-38. I attended summer encampment with the National Guard near Jacksonville, and a special winter encampment as war seemed to be coming near down at where Camp Landing was later constructed. But they let me out as it appeared that the National Guard was going to be nationalized, and since I was only 14 or 15 years old, I could not legally serve in the military at that point. After 1 year of college at the University of Michigan as a pre-med student, I came home and was inducted into the United States Navy. I had planned on entering the Army because I'd been in the Army National Guard, but the Army was giving 3 weeks pre-induction leave, and the Navy only 1 week. So by the time they got to the W's, all the slots in the Army were taken, and it was my good luck that I was forced to go into the Navy. I attended boot training at the U.S. Naval Training Station at Bainbridge, Maryland. And on the completion of boot training, I attended the Hospital Corpsman School, also at Bainbridge, Maryland. And on completion of that course, I was sent to the Jacksonville Naval Hospital, Jacksonville, Florida. The training for a hospital corpsman in the peacetime Navy required about 6 months. Because of the war, they shortened it to 6 weeks. And for my group, they were in a big hurry getting ready for the landing in Europe, and we completed it in 5 weeks. I served on sick officers' quarters at the Jacksonville Naval Hospital, where I reached the rank of Pharmacist Mate 3rd class. And it was my assignment to sick officers' quarters, and helped them take care of naval pilots who had ground looped or things of this sort, and giving them injuries that required hospitalization. But I applied for the entrance into the V12 college training program, and my scores were apparently good enough that I was selected for that, and they returned me to the University of Michigan, where I was reduced to the rank of apprentice seaman, but allowed to attend college free of charge to complete my pre-medical training. After that, I was delayed in getting into medical school, but did get into medical school at Vanderbilt in 1947 and graduated in 1951. Upon graduation from the medical school, I accepted a commission in the United States Public Health Service and took a rotating internship at the U.S. Public Health Service hospital. They used to call them the Marine hospitals, referring to merchant marine. They were for taking care of merchant seamen in Seattle, Washington. Seattle was my wife's birthplace, and this is where her family lived, and I wanted to give her one last chance to see her family before I took her off to far away places. But I became very much interested in surgical training programs which the Public Health Service offered. And after spending 2 years as a junior surgical officer at the hospital in Mobile and Detroit and finally back to Seattle, I did enter the surgical residency program and completed the residency training in surgery in 1957. I was then assigned to the Alaska Native Hospital in Anchorage, Alaska, where I was named chief of surgery, and had the responsibility for the surgical program at that hospital and for providing special emergency surgical services at the remote hospitals scattered around the state of Alaska, about Kanakanak, Kotzebue, Barrow, Kanakanak, and following 3 years in Alaska, I was assigned to the Surgery Branch National Cancer Institute, National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, where I served for approximately 3 years doing both basic research in cancer and also clinical research in cancer.
Dr. West, can I stop you here for
Yes.
a moment? Let's go back to prior to your entry into the public health service.
Yes,
And you indicated that you were a corpsman in the Navy.
I'd been a corpsman in the Navy, yes.
Was it your intent when you joined the Navy to get into the medical branch?
No,
What was your goal when you joined the Navy?
I thought I was going to be fighting in the war, and in corpsman school, I thought I'd be fighting in the war as a hospital corpsman. And the opportunity came to get into the V12 program, and I had intended to go to medical school before I got drafted, but we set that aside because we had to do what was necessary in the war, and I had no preset plans. I didn't even know there was a V12 program when I entered the Navy.
Can you explain V12?
It was a hospital. Correction. It was a college training program for people who were going into special areas in the naval service, either as a physician or an engineer. And some of my classmates at Michigan were studying naval architecture, some were studying aeronautical engineering, etc. But that was the name of the program. There was a V6 program, which was a college program for persons who were planning to enter as naval aviators. But V12 was a college training program for people who were going to do something other than being pilots.
So this was the Navy would give you an opportunity to specialize in certain fields.
Yeah, and of course we didn't know how long the war was going to last, and it was expected by the Navy that I would be a Navy physician and be serving in that capacity.
I understand.
But with the atomic bombs, the war ended sooner than they had expected, and I had not completed, had not even entered medical school at that point.
So you were separated from the Navy
In 1945,
prior to going into the
before I got into medical
before
school.
you got into medical school.
And I did not enter the U.S. Public Health Service, which is one of the 7 uniformed services. And the other one that no one ever knows about as a uniformed service is the National Aeronautics and Oceanic Administration, which is called NOAA.
I don't know.
Okay. But everybody knows about the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marine Corps. But those are the other 2.
Okay, continue, would you please?
All right.
You were in
So
Alaska.
I was in Alaska, and then I went to the National Cancer Institute, where I was involved in both basic science and in clinical research in the field of cancer. And after approximately 3 years at Bethesda, I was reassigned to the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital in Seattle, Washington, the place where I had my internship and my surgical training. And I went there as the chief of surgery, and the opportunity to operate a surgical training program. While I was there, the Public Health Service had developed a program they called the Surgical Team Program. They wanted to have some non-military but helpful service to the people of Vietnam, And so the Public Health Service agreed that they would have surgical programs at the municipal hospitals in 3 sites: Cantho, down in the Mekong Delta, Nha Trang, which is on the coast, and Da Nang, which is north, just a little ways south of the border between North and South Vietnam. And so I had a 3-month temporary duty assignment to assist the surgeon who was at Da Nang. He was the only physician serving on the team at that point. They had 2 physicians initially, but one had come home. And the main thrust of our work there was treating military injuries to civilians. This was in 1964. I was there when the Gulf of Tonkin incident occurred, and shortly followed by the landing of Marines at Nha Trang. And you know the rest of the story on the Vietnam War. But I spent 3 months there working with Vietnamese physicians at the Da Nang Municipal Hospital. And this was a very important part of my career. It gave me some new insights on the nature of that conflict, and gave me a chance to yield some significant service to people who were in desperate need, civilians of Vietnam.
Were you in an area of combat?
The North Vietnamese Army did not reach Da Nang while I was there, but we were constantly threatened by Viet Cong, and we never knew who amongst us was the Viet Cong. And some of the staff of the hospital where I worked were accused of being Viet Cong, and it was a very unstable situation. And during the time that I was in Da Nang, there was a local civil war between the Buddhists and the Catholics. Most of the Catholics in Da Nang had come from North Vietnam at the time of partitioning of the country. They fled south. But the Catholics were not welcomed by the Buddhists, and so there was great unrest in the city, and people were hung from trees and killed in the conflict between the Buddhists and the Catholics at that time.
You were in the military compound, were you?
No, in fact, they made a point that I should not travel there in uniform. The Public Health Service officers traditionally wear a uniform that is patterned after the United States Navy, but they wanted this to be seen not as a military operation, but as a humanitarian assistance program. So we dressed in civilian attire and took care of whatever problems they had. We treated cancer, we treated infections, we treated a lot of military trauma to civilians, where buses ran over landmines and terrible things like this. And I made some good friends. Some of the Vietnamese, one of the Vietnamese gynecologists who worked there later had to leave when everything fell apart in 1975. He managed to escape, and we struck up our friendship again after he got to the United States. But following the experience in Vietnam, I continued to run the surgery.
If you don't mind, I'd like to
Yes,
explore
all right,
that a little
yes.
bit more.
All right.
As I understand it, the primary purpose of your unit being there was to administer to the citizens of Vietnam,
The civilians.
to the civilian population,
That's right.
not necessarily the military.
Not the military at all.
I see.
But the civilians, because of the way that war was occurring with the Viet Cong, and you didn't know where the front was anymore. And so the person that you thought was your colleague at work might secretly have been the Viet Cong, and it was kind of unnerving. You never knew. When the outbreak occurred between the Buddhists and the Catholics, they then had barbed wire put around the hotel where I was residing, and there were tanks in the street nearby, because they didn't know how bad that unrest was going to become. But,
In other words, you could have been treating Viet Cong the same as
yes.
treating
and,
other
we
South
made no
Vietnamese.
tests. If a person had an illness or an injury that needed care, we took care of it. And on one occasion, the Buddhist came into the hospital and took one of the patients that we had there on the operating table and took him out. And my understanding is that he was hung from a tree. But we were somewhat threatened. We were not considered to be in. Was not considered hazardous duty. That is, we didn't get any special compensation. Mm-hmm. If people had been firing guns at us or at the hospital, it would have been hazardous duty, but it was not so considered at that time.
And in your mind, this was one of the most significant periods of your service?
Yeah, because it made me understand what folly that war was. That we were, and this was reinforced later by the literature occurring at that time. David Halberstam's piece, The Making of a Quagmire, for instance, that we did not have a viable, effective government of integrity with which we could collaborate. And they were tyrants themselves. They did not have the support of the people in the countryside, and it was a poor choice. Mm-hmm. Time and place for a war.
So you felt that you were contributing to the well-being of the citizens,
yes,
who were involved in this?
Yeah, they were victims of a conflict that just did not have a clear front. Mm-hmm. And everybody was at risk.
I see. Good. Continue, would you please?
I returned then to Seattle and continued to run the surgical residency program there for the next several years. And my last 2 years in the U.S. Public Health Service were spent with the Indian Health Service based at Phoenix, Arizona. And we took care of the Navajo and the Pima and the Apaches and all the Indians of the Southwest. They might come to our. Got a new hospital constructed in Phoenix that year, and this was a gratifying service. Mm-hmm. It was disappointing that financial support for these medical programs for Indians was so inadequate. The financial support was so inadequate that we could not pay for overtime operating room nurses and so on. So people would come into the hospital with their symptomatic gallbladder disease, and our schedule did not permit us to get them taken care of in a timely fashion, and we couldn't run overtime. We didn't have enough funds for that. So sometimes a person might stay in the hospital for 3 weeks waiting for his day in surgery and went home with his gallstone still in his gallbladder. And this was a disappointing thing to me in the public health service. We simply could not get the program adequately financed so that we could give quality, expeditious service. Mm-hmm. I retired then from the U.S. Public Health Service and entered private practice of surgery in LaGrange, Georgia. Since I arrived in LaGrange, I've become associated with an organization which was called TROA, the Retired Officers Association. It's now called the Military Officers Association of America. And this keeps me in contact with the military and the uniformed services.
If I may, let's go back to your service overseas. You were married at the time, were you?
Yes, we were married after my freshman year in medical school.
And did your wife accompany you on any of these trips abroad?
No, sir.
And how did you maintain contact?
Just letters.
It's just through the mail?
Letters, yeah. Mm-hmm. And 3 months is not that long a time, but Ruth was insisting that I maintain letters with my children. We had 5 children by this time. Mm-hmm. And one of the notable correspondences with my oldest child, my daughter Phyllis, was a a poem that I wrote her. And, and years later we put it to music. And when I retired, I took up guitar. So, but it's a little song about how tragic and terrible the war was.
Now let you compose yourself.
In July of 1964, I wrote a note to my daughter Phyllis, who had sent a poem to me while I was in Vietnam. And this was a little poem which goes like this. The weather's hot in Vietnam, except when it is raining. Rain is wet, and you can bet the sweat and rain were draining. The flowers bloom in Vietnam, free and blaze of glory. The people bleed and breed and bleed, a most confusing story. There are cocktail parties in Saigon and fighting in the mountains. And pretty girls with bloody curls. And babies bleed like fountains. The weather's hot in Vietnam. The army soldiers never. They take their rest in a cozy nest, and the fight goes on forever. But it was just so sad to see innocent civilians suffering these injuries. We, in preparation of a book honoring the veterans of Troup County, Georgia, I looked at some of the current literature on the subject. And there was one in which Mike Wallace had a part. It was called The Medal of Honor. And in this, they quote General David Shoup, who had previously been the Commandant of the United States Marine Corps. By the time the Vietnam War came along, he had retired. But his assessment of that conflict at that time was a very unpopular one in our country. He said, "It's the wrong war, the wrong time, the wrong place, and not worth the loss of a single American life or limb." And now we have the Vietnam Memorial with the tens of thousands of names of Americans who died there. Sad.
So, despite the fact that you were in Vietnam, you saw things going on that you did not agree with. Is that correct?
Well, I saw innocent civilians who had no interest in one side or the other of this fight, who were being sacrificed, and it was sad. And of course, I was not in touch with American military. I saw the sky was full of helicopters at that time. Felt like so many insects. I'd never seen so many helicopters. But everywhere particularly at Saigon, the sky was just full of coming and going all the time. And as I looked out in the landing field at Tan Son Nhut, where we had hundreds of F-100s lined up out there, with a price tag of probably of more than $1 million each. And $1 million would have built a fully equipped hospital. And that way we could have won the hearts and minds of the people. But expenditures for weapons of war so much more popular than humanitarian expenditures. That's the way we get caught up in this cycle.
You were able to see events during that time from a different perspective than many of the veterans that I have interviewed. Based on your experience there, what would be your advice to the American public today, and particularly young people who are considering joining the military?
You know, the personnel in our military are fine, honorable, patriotic individuals, and I think that they are put to ill use by the politicians who make the decisions. It's the politicians who decide if we go to war or not. And the military people simply carry out their orders. And I think that we have done such wonderful things with our military sometimes in World War II. What a wonder that we were able to put away that savage dictator Hitler and get about the business of rehabilitating Europe and Japan. That's wonderful. But when revenge gets into the equation, it never ends. One side wants to inflict an injury that's greater than the one he had suffered, and it never stops. But I think it is our military, and I know of many of the veterans in the veterans organizations with which I'm presently affiliated, and they're fine, wonderful people, and they do what they're told, but their politicians make the decisions, and we need to hold them accountable.
So you look back with pride on what particular event or what particular period, mostly?
Well, I was proud that I could lend a healing hand to the civilians of Vietnam during the time that I was there. Later on, while I was in the public health service, I was temporarily assigned to the burn center at Brooke Army Hospital, and I was proud that I was able to help in rehabilitating our injured veterans who were flown back there, a plane load at a time with extensive burns. And I was so proud to be a part of such a great institution as the United States Army Institute of Surgical Research. They were dedicated people, and they really worked out some wonderful new medical science in the management of burns, and to be a part of that was really a great privilege. And the poor people that we were treating, they were military people who were doing what they were told by the politicians. And I have nothing but admiration and sympathy for them, but we need to hold the politicians accountable for the decisions they make and how they put our young people at risk.
And did you advise any of your children? You had one daughter, you said you had 5 kids.
Yeah.
Were the others boys?
I had 3 boys and 2 daughters. One other was for a short time in the Army, and they found themselves incompatible in the Army and my son, so they parted company. But we.
So neither of your children really went into the military as a career?
No, two of my sons-in-laws are in federal service, but one is at the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Mm. The other is a research scientist with the Department of Agriculture. So they're wonderful things that one can do in government service that are creative and dealing with human needs. The military, if properly managed, plays a very useful role also. We were able to rescue the people of Yugoslavia from their tyrant. And I hope that things will turn out well in Iraq, but and I think the motivation for getting rid of that tyrant was well deserved, but we need to be careful how we put our people at risk, and it should be for a good cause. If they'd asked General David Shoup about the Vietnam War, we would be much better off. We would not suffer the emotional scars that we still carry from that conflict.
So if they had listened to him.
If they had listened to him.
Yes.
They didn't ask him, and they didn't care about his opinion.
Well, is this all that you would like to share with us, Dr. West?
Yes, I think so, Fred. It's been a pleasure to be here with you, and I contributed very little in World War II. I did spend a little time giving some aid to injured pilots, but mostly it was a benefit for me in advancing my education, and I hope that I've made good use of that so that it balances out.
Well, I'm sure that those who view this or who listen to this at a later date will realize that your significant contribution was to the citizenry of Vietnam, and that that is what you should be justly proud of.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.